This video is sponsored by Cool Stuff Inc. If you're looking for cards in the US, look no further as you can use the promo code MTGMuddstah to get you 5% off anything on the site. You can also use the promo code MTGMuddstah for 5% off your orders from Face-to-Face Games, Canada's largest Magic the Gathering store, with qualified orders getting free shipping Canada-wide. And if you just want to help out the channel, you can always consider becoming a patron for as little as $1 a month and join the generic Goblin Gang. Hey gang, and welcome back to another Modern with Muddstah. We've got some brand new decks, which admittedly is not very hard to do considering I've only posted one other game, and this week we have Mathieu playing Reanimator and Andre playing Izzet Turns. Both players decide to mull down to 6, and Andre wins the die roll and decides to be on the play. To start us off, Andre plays a Scalding Tarn. Mathieu drops a Godless Shrine untapped, taking 2. He evokes Grief by exiling Thoughtseize, and stacks the triggers to resolve Grief's ability before the evoke trigger. He then looks at Andre's hand. He has Andre get rid of the Snapcaster Mage, and then moving to the evoke trigger, Mathieu responds to his own trigger by casting Ephemerate and blinking Grief, and this time around has Grief hit Narset. Andre then cracks the Tarn at the end of turn, losing 1, and finds a tap Steam Vents. Andre draws and plays a Polluted Delta. Mathieu's upkeep has the Ephemerate rebounding, and he once more targets the Grief. This time he hits the new Snapcaster Mage in Andre's hand. Mathieu then plays another Godless Shrine, taking 2 so it comes in untapped, and casts an Unmarked Grave. He goes into his library and puts to his graveyard an Archon of Cruelty, and Andre cracks his Delta, losing 1 to find another Steam Vents before moving to his turn. Andre draws and plays Mokokoro, Center of the Sea, and passes to Mathieu. Mathieu drops a Marsh Flats and continues to just devour Andre's hand, this time with a Thoughtseize. He loses 2 and has Andre pitch an Opt. Mathieu then cracks the flats to go and find a Watery Grave, taking 2 so it comes in untapped. He then casts Persist and targets the Archon, which comes in with a -1/-1 counter. The Archon's Enter the Battlefield trigger then goes on the stack, and Andre activates Mokokoro, having both players draw a card. They then resolve the Archon entering, which has Andre lose 3, discard a card, and would have to sacrifice a creature if he had any. Mathieu also gains 3 and draws a card. Moving to combat, Grief hits Andre for 3. Andre draws and passes. Mathieu draws for turn and goes to combat. He swings the Archon and Grief, and gets an on-attack trigger from the Archon. This has Andre lose 3 and discard a card, while Mathieu gains 3 and draws 1. Andre then takes 8. In his second main phase, Mathieu plays a tapped Godless Shrine and passes. At the end of turn, Andre uses Mokokoro to draw them both a card. Andre draws and casts Opt in his main phase. He scries 1 and bottoms it and scoops up game 1 to Mathieu. Moving to the sideboard, Andre moves out a Lightning Bolt, Time Warp, and Temporal Mastery. He sides in Days Undoing, Narset, and Jace the Mind Sculptor. Mathieu sideboards out a Solitude, Prismatic Ending, and 1 copy of his Archon of Cruelty. He brings in Ashiok, the 3-drop Teferi, and another Thoughtseize. For game 2, Andre once more decides to be on the play. He plays a tap Steam Vents, passing. Mathieu plays a Flooded Strand. Andre plays out a Flooded Strand as well, and at the end of turn, Mathieu cracks his strand to go and find a tapped Watery Grave. Mathieu draws and plays out a Hollowed Fountain, shocking himself for 2. He then taps 2 mana for a Priest of Fell Rites and passes. At the end of turn, Andre cracks his strand to go and find another Steam Vents. Andre draws for turn and plays a Sulphur Falls. He pays 1 red to bolt the Priest and passes. Mathieu plays a tapped Watery Grave and passes. Andre casts Expressive Iteration in his main phase, putting a Polluted Delta into exile, 1 card to hand, and bottoming the 3rd. He then plays the Polluted Delta and passes. At the end of turn, Mathieu taps 2 for a Faithful Mending, and Andre lets it resolve, with Mathieu gaining 2, drawing 2, and discarding 2 lands. Mathieu plays an untapped Hollowed Fountain, taking 2, and evokes out a Mulldrifter. The draw resolves, and before moving to sacrifice, Mathieu casts Ephemerate on the Mulldrifter. This resolves as well, blinking the Mulldrifter and drawing him 2 more, while the Ephemerate goes to exile from its rebound ability. He then passes, and Andre cracks the delta at the end of turn to find an island. Andre then casts Opt, bottoming the card, and drawing, and moving to his turn. Andre plays a Scalding Tarn, and passes. Metya untaps and on his upkeep rebounds the Ephemerate, blinking Mulldrifter to draw 2, and then draws for turn. In his main phase, he casts Thoughtseize, but Andre counters it with a Force of Negation, exiling Temporal Mastery. Metya then puts to stack another Faithless Mending, drawing him 2, gaining him 2, and he discards a Godless Shrine and a Prismatic Ending. Metya then shocks out a Godless Shrine, and casts a Thoughtseize. Andre can't protect his hand this time, and Metya picks a Day's Undoing and loses 2. Andre draws and plays a Flooded Strand. He casts a Snapcaster Mage and targets the Day's Undoing as it enters. Andre then cracks the Tarn to go and find an island, and flashes back Day's Undoing. With the spell in the stack, Metya flash evokes out Solitude by exiling Faithless Mending from his hand. The Solitude exile triggers Resolve first, exiling Snapcaster Mage and gaining Andre 2. Before resolving the Evoke sacrifice, Metya casts another Ephemerate to blink the Solitude. It re-enters but with no target to exile, but at least he doesn't have to sacrifice it. The players then shuffle their hands and graveyards into their libraries and draw a fresh 7, and Andre's turn immediately ends. Metya untaps and on his upkeep rebounds the Ephemerate. He targets the Mulldrifter, and Andre cracks the Strand first, losing 1 to find an island. He then casts Opt, scrying 1 and bottoming it, then drawing a card. The Ephemerate then resolves, with Metya drawing 2 and then drawing for turn. In his main phase, he plays an Urborg and casts Kaido Shizuki. He upticks the Planeswalker, drawing a card and then discarding Archon of Cruelty since he hasn't attacked. Metya then taps 2 for Persist and brings back the Archon with a -1/-1 counter. This has Andre losing 3 and discarding a card, while Metya draws a card and gains 3. Metya then swings Solitude, dealing 3 and gaining 3 before passing turn. Andre plays a Sulphur Falls for turn and casts Temporal Mastery, taking an extra turn. Moving to his extra turn, Andre untaps and draws. He casts Expressive Iteration, exiling an island, putting 1 to hand, and bottoming another card. He plays an island for turn, and then casts Time Warp, taking an extra turn and moving directly to it. Andre's next turn has him playing a Flooded Strand, and he cracks it, losing 1 to find an island. 7 mana then gets him another Temporal Mastery, and he moves yet again to his next extra turn. Andre draws and plays a Polluted Delta, cracking it and losing 1 to find an island. He taps 2 mana for a Snapcaster Mage, this time flashing back Time Warp and moving to another extra turn. Andre draws and plays a tapped Hall of the Storm Giants. With no extra turn spells unfortunately, he has to pass to Metya. Metya plays a Marsh Flats for turn, and is able to tap it for mana thanks to Urborg. He casts through Fairy, and Andre responds by hardcasting a Force of Negation to counter the Planeswalker. With that done, Metya then moves to combat, swinging the team, and Andre knows when he's done for, scooping it up. Game review time! So this is coming from someone who really hasn't played Modern in probably upwards of 2 years, but I'm actually really excited to see all the new archetypes that are popping up as a result of Modern Horizons 2. The fact that we have a Reanimator deck in Modern is fantastic, and Archon of Cruelty is a beautiful target to bring back. I also enjoy seeing non-standardized decks like the Blue-Red Turns, although I'm not entirely sure where that falls on the hierarchy of Modern deck lists. I think Andre actually had a pretty strong chance of winning Game 2 if it weren't for the fact that during his extra turn cycles, all he drew were lands. I think if he'd been able to find even just one Lightning Bolt here or there and clear up some of Matthew's side of the board, he would have been in such a better position, especially after he played that Hall of the Storm Giant. This video wouldn't be possible without the help from my sponsors, Cool Stuff Inc., Original Magic Art, and Alter Sleeves. But it definitely wouldn't be possible without the help from you, the viewers, and my patrons. So I just want to say thank you for watching, and to remember, Friends are just opponents you haven't eliminated yet.